Hello and welcome to the Supernatural Fandom Track. I'm your host, Gail Z, and today we are talking with half of the authors of Monstrum, which is an academic study of supernatural. We've got another part 2 coming with the other half. But before we dive into all of the goodness of what we're going to talk about today, I'd love to have my wonderful panelists please introduce themselves, starting with Stacey.
Hi, I'm Stacey Abbott. I teach film and television studies at the University of Roehampton in London, and I was one of the guest editors of this issue of Monstrum.
Awesome. Steve.
Hi, I'm Steve Halfyard. I write as Janet K. Halfyard, and I work at the Royal Conservatoire of Scotland in Glasgow in the UK. I'm a musicologist. I teach film and television music and other things musical.
Okay. Regina.
Hi, I'm Regina Hansen. I teach at Boston University. And what did I write about? And I wrote the article about supernatural God and narrative agency.
Okay. Melissa.
Hi, I'm Melissa Edmundson. I teach at Clemson University, where I specialize in 19th and 20th century women writers in the Gothic and supernatural. And I authored the essay on Gothic nostalgia and supernatural.
Okay. Kristopher.
Hi, I'm Kristopher Woofter in Montreal. I teach at Dawson College, and my areas of teaching and research are horror, the weird traditions in cinema and literature, and I am the editor of Monstrum as well. And my piece in this issue was co-authored with Erin Giannini on the Scooby Natural episode.
Which we'll get to in just a few minutes. But let's start by telling folks what Monstrum is. So, Stacey, Kristopher, anybody who wants to jump in on that?
Chris, do you want to jump in first about Monstrum itself? Then I can talk about the issue.
Sure. So Monstrum is an online open access peer-reviewed journal, scholarly journal, related or devoted to horror and adjacent areas. So it's not just horror. We do avant-garde, pretty much anything, that we think could like vaguely link up to horror. So a genre devoted journal, and it's published by the Montreal Monstrum Society, which also hosts lecture series, and most recently Stacey's been one of the lecturers, and the lectures are also free. Since things changed in the world recently, we've had to we moved our lectures online, so everything's free, and so it's pretty cool. We have now 3 semesters of lectures up on the Montreal Monstrum Society website. So the journal is linked there as well, and but yeah, everything there is free and open access. So,
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Stacey.
Yeah, and so the issue we did on Supernatural was something, and you'll see in the second group, my husband Simon Brown and I had this idea that'd be really nice to do something to mark the end of Supernatural, which had dominated a large portion of our lives, professionally and personally. So we were looking for something that would be published. Academic publishing can be really slow and take forever to come out, and we thought it'd be really nice to do something that would be kind of immediate and or comparatively faster. And because I'd worked with Chris before, we suddenly thought, well, the Monstrum would be a great place to house it, because they were fantastically flexible about timetable and scheduling, but also it's available online for as many people as possible to read it, as opposed to often expensive academic journals or books. We wanted people to read this, and not just a small select group of academic readers or students. So that was the idea, was to do an issue that would reflect on Supernatural in all its glory.
Well, 15 years, 327 episodes. There's a whole lot of glory there to reflect. and a whole lot of content to parse through, which brings me kind of to the next question, sort of frames this up, and that is, what are fandom studies? When did this become a thing? You know, I loved reading the essays. It was kind of like those late night in-depth conversations you have with the other person who is obsessed as much with something as you are, and you go down the rabbit hole and you parse it out, and I'm going, oh my gosh, there are classes on this. We just had to do that late night at conventions. How does this work? So fill us in briefly on where that came from and why.
I can jump in a bit, but anyone else, please do jump in. I mean, I suppose what we're doing falls under fandom studies, but also kind of cult TV studies. There's a whole range of areas, increasingly things like Supernatural have been part of. And I suppose it's come out of, I suppose it's one thing is leading to another, that, you know, film studies has been around for a long time. And I think people in film studies, like I come from a film studies background, started watching television and saying, well, look, there's this amazing amount of television that is as exciting, if not more exciting, than a lot of cinema. And so when you started seeing TV studies growing out of film studies and English studies, and my other colleagues might speak to that as well. And then fan studies kind of grew from those areas as well, that, you know, that suddenly you're saying it's not just the text, but it's the people who are actually make this interesting. So I think it's kind of, you know, it's coming from people like us who are scholars and fans saying, actually, what we're doing is really interesting and this is worth talking about.
Actually, just to jump in on that as well, I mean, one of the things that I wanted to mention was that a lot of us actually started out as people around Buffy studies, or that was certainly how I met quite a few of the people in this room at the moment, and that was the first place where I certainly started engaging with other people on the idea of, well, am I a scholar fan or a fan scholar, and what's the difference? And this whole idea of us as academics who were also fans and fans who were also academics became a really important part of how we position ourselves in relation to the text that we're studying. And it's also a lot of fun.
I think it's so exciting because when I was in college and grad school, your genre related interests were things you did not mention to the faculty because that never went well. And so it's wonderful to see it kind of come into a much deserved spotlight and kind of receive that legitimacy from academic studies. Anybody else want to chime in on that before we get to the creamy filling in the middle here?
I would just add, it's not been an easy road to getting it accepted. And certainly in the early years, we all talked about the snigger factor of the way that people reacted when we told them what we did, if it was Buffy or Supernatural or whatever. But these days, you know, I'd say certainly the last 10 years, there's been a much wider acceptance of it as a completely legitimate way to go about one's business.
Yeah, for sure.
I concur. Well, now you've all written wonderful essays, and I want to try to at least catch something from each of them. And let's kind of start back at the beginning with the whole Gothic premise. Melissa, I know that's your jam, and anybody else who wants to chime in as well, but Supernatural certainly has a lot of Gothic underpinnings. It owes a debt to earlier, not only film and TV, but literature as well. How does that play into making the text of the show what it became?
Yeah, well, I think that's another maybe neat example too of how work in Supernatural sort of bridges really nicely the more traditional sense of academic literary studies, which is sort of where I come from, and then looking at how that transfers over to something like Supernatural. But yeah, I'll mention I did edit a book for McFarlane in 2016 called The Gothic Tradition in Supernatural. So thank you, Stacey and Simon, for inviting me, because it was a thrill to be able to write this essay. But in that book, and then what I did for the essay too is try to show how various Gothic elements really do transfer nicely into, the narrative of the show. So sort of, definitely dealing with the most obvious, right, with the creatures, and the ghost and everything like that comes in. I think I said like ghosts are like the second biggest character, right? Group behind demons, I think it is. Someone correct me if I'm wrong, but those are, what makes the show what it is. But there's also that kind of undercurrent of, like I talk about in the essay, this idea of nostalgia, or the pull of the past and being haunted in more abstract ways. The unsettled home, and the absent mother and father, family and legacy and curses. So I wanted to sort of bring that out, more, that there's sort of those underlying issues that are really the foundation of the show and have lasted, like you said, all 15 years you can find these themes.
Okay. And there's a reason we talk about something having a Gothic vibe, and you're right, Supernatural at its very core has all of those things that we tend to throw the word around, even in layman's terms, to mean. So yeah, very powerful aspect of that. Now, agency comes up a lot in the story, whether it is team free will 1.0 or 2.0, whether it's the Winchesters defying the apocalypse and God himself, whether it's Sam fighting really hard to be his own person. Agency comes up so often. And Regina, I know you had a lot of thoughts on that. And again, anybody who wants to chime in as well, please go ahead.
So what's really interesting about Sam and Dean's sort of quest for agency is that it mirrors humanity's quest for agency. It's very much within the sort of Abrahamic framework. So, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, that sort of religious framework. And so that in the beginning of their what do you call it, their narrative, the beginning of they are sort of within that framework, and they're having a quest for agency within that sort of religious framework, scriptural framework, that many people who have sort of been at the mercy of that sort of framework in the world understand and recognize. But then also we have this idea of the writer as God. So then they're also at the mercy of, their agency is also at the mercy of a writer. And then in the end, what I found really fascinating is that they're also, because Supernatural was so great with its fans, our characters, our central characters, their agency is also at the mercy of the power of the fans and the love that the fans have for these characters. And I'll tell you, like, I talk about the ending with and I guess it's okay to do spoilers on this conversation, right?
Yeah, it's been a year.
As a scholar, I totally get that ending. They had to do what they did. They had to kill off Dean because that is the ultimate expression of the agency of these characters. Dean wanted to die. I didn't want him to die. God didn't want him to die. Nobody wanted him to, but especially, and I don't think the writers, the fans didn't want him to die. And so in his death, we have almost the ultimate expression of these characters as characters and as representatives of humanity, just saying, no, it's my time. I'm leaving.
And narratively, you also have, and Supernatural loves its mirror images, you also have the reverse of Swan Song on who dies and who lives.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. And Supernatural does that over and over again, where you have those mirrors between the brothers' experience. And times like Dean doesn't get why Sam's so upset about Gadriel until he's got Michael in his head. And then it's kind of like, oh, now I get it.
Yeah.
And they also don't want to leave each other, and they sort of kind of try to control each other's destiny. They're always pulling each other back from death. They're always, they can't live without each other. So in the end, it also becomes, as they finally find each other in the heaven that is created for the series, they seem finally to be at peace. Okay, we are. This is where we actually kind of are now. And it's not necessarily that they want to be dead, but they just want to be done.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that that's really interesting.
Well, and you know, we kind of got a foreshadowing of that even as early as the musical episode, where you can see in their expressions, this is the first time they've heard Carry On Wayward Son and thought about it in terms of their life, and they're Polacks. They're just, oh my God, this has been here all the time, and it's us.
Yeah.
And so it's really kind of fulfilling on that promise. Yeah, some very complex things going on here.
So
Chris,
it's
you were
really,
going to say something.
yeah, it was just interesting how it ties into the Gothic tropes as well, because they're, you know, the 19th century Gothic is, especially in the UK versions, is kind of unanchored, wayward existence, right? Your identity is tied to a certain locale or a home or a house and family, and then there's often this kind of like, you know, I'm thinking of Wilkie Collins' No Name or something like that, where a character just loses her entire identity, and that the two Winchester boys, you know, are tied to a kind of female Gothic, which is really interesting, and that vulnerability is part of the show. You know, the vulnerability of having agency stripped and losing your claim to an identity and a home and a family, and it's kind of interesting.
Which I think is something that, on a gut level, a lot of fans really, that resonated with people who have had maybe not as spectacular experience as the Winchesters, but similar enough that they're going, I get you. I've been there, been to a corner of that myself. Yeah. Which also comes into things like haunted memories, nostalgia, music. The music is such a big part of Supernatural. Anybody want to chime in on that?
Well, yes. I did actually manage to forget that I wrote the essay on music in the Monstrum thing. I forgot to say that in the introduction. I mean, the way that music actually gives Dean agency, the way the music forms itself around him on so many different levels, that is one of the most wonderful. It's kind of why I'm a Dean girl. You know, I have to be on the Dean side of things, simply because all the music is around him. I'm going to apologize for describing his eyes as blue in my essay. Of course, they're not blue, never mind. They're metaphorically blue. But yeah, so you've got these two sides to his musical personality, one of which he actually owns, even though he inherited it from his dad, which is all the rock songs, and the way those, he kind of soundtracks his life with them. At the same time, the series soundtracks itself with them. There's a kind of dualism there. But also his musical theme, this kind of really sad little piano theme that we get on so many different occasions. The rock songs are almost kind of a bid for agency, because they have that strength of character, so to speak, and that drive, that rhythmic momentum to them. The theme that he has that crops up in the underscore kind of undercuts his agency all the time. It's the thing that not so much holds him back, but makes him vulnerable. And so you have these two musical sides to Dean, which I think, they are all based around ideas of him as a narrative agent, and that push and pull between the mission, which again he inherited from his father, along with the music and the car and the coat, and on the other side you've got this second voice that is definitely his voice in that theme, which speaks to all that pain and vulnerability that he has, and which it pushes in the other direction again, away from the mission, and raises that doubt. That's the bit that does want to lay his weary head and rest. So yeah, I mean, that push and pull in the music is something that I have always absolutely loved.
Well, someone pointed out that for John, the music was a memory of better days when he was with Mary and before all this happened. For Dean, growing up in the Impala with his dad and his brother, the music is an anchor to his father and family. For Sam, who didn't remember any of that, it means Dean and home and the Impala. And to see the same ragged cardboard box of cassette tapes mean so much to 3 different characters over that period of years, that's a pretty remarkable narrative thing to pull off, let alone how perfect they are in matching the music to the mood. I mean, Renegade, God Was Never on Your Side. I mean, just some of these, before the show even starts, you're just sitting there going, oh my God, I can't believe they went there. And they did. And it's so perfect. Yeah. And certainly plenty of haunted memories to go with that. Now, Kristopher, I am really fascinated on the Scooby-Doo piece of this because I'll admit, before there was Supernatural, there was Scooby. And I have been a lifelong fan of that. And I was pleased that they didn't cheapen one to go with the other. They really treated both with respect. And Scooby at this point has a 50-some-year heritage as well. Talk a little, please, about the role of the lore and Scooby-Doo in the show, because they have a lot in common, actually.
Yeah, they do. I wore my Scooby shirt today in honor. Well, it's interesting because Scooby-Doo, Where Are You? The first iteration of the show, and then the Scooby-Doo show after that. We don't really talk. You could have so many titles of Scooby-Doo that, you know, it would fill up the entire word count of the essay. So we stuck with the first iteration of the show, but that show is like an urtext for so many other shows, iZombie and Buffy, and, you know, arguably this show and the X-Files, and, you know, these shows where people are investigating, you know, often real monsters, and the, you know, Scooby-Doo kind of falls in the trend of that kind of Radcliffian, you know, like, we're gonna hold up a phantasmagoria of supernatural possibility, but then we're gonna whip open the curtain and there's the Wizard of Oz, like, playing with the mechanics. How many illusions did I just make in one sentence? But you know, I think with Scooby, what was so surprising when Erin and I were talking about the essay back and forth, and this essay was kind of written in emails to each other because we just kept riffing on it, but was the surprising part was the melancholic part of the nostalgia, that we actually started feeling that Scooby-Doo, Where Are You? Is a bit of a pessimistic show, as much as it's zany and funny and, you know, crazy, weird. It actually has at its heart a real indictment of greed and, you know, these kinds of, like, the kind of moral lessons that pulp fiction, pulp horror was interested in playing with. And, you know, Velma says in the episode, well, no, ghosts aren't real. It's really just real estate developers that, you know, are the villains. But to have that kind of balance between, you know, where Dean is trying to sort of hide the truth, you know, that monsters are real, and then knowing that in Scooby-Doo monsters are never real, and that that is to me, that was just such a wonderful, I mean, I think our conclusion says, you know, the show seems to suggest that even if Scooby's monsters weren't real, they still are, because they're real in the fan imagination, or the kind of nostalgia that Dean holds for it, which is kind of attached to his longing. So we had a lot of fun with that, but we found this sort of, like, very poignant sort of bleakness at the center of everything that was a surprise coming from Scooby-Doo. So.
One of the things that struck me was the poignancy when Dean tells Sam, no matter what crappy motel Dad left us in, there was always Scooby-Doo. And you can just imagine Dean as a kid, he's got that as consistency, and his brother, and the rest of his life is that was very poignant. You know, one of the things that strikes me again about all of this and all the references people have made to Buffy and X-Files and all other kinds of fandom is the amount of cultural absorption that goes in with being a fan to immediately mentally bridge those gaps, bring them together, get the references. Oh, that's a joke that is using a quote from this and a graphic from that, and they all go together. And if you've ever walked through a Comic-Con or a Dragon Con and you've seen the mashups or just read all the t-shirts, sometimes I am amazed at the amount of cognitive processing it takes to be a fan and get all the references. And, you know, there's a lot going on upstairs to get those jokes.
Can I just, it's funny because
Yeah.
when you were talking about that before, you were talking about fan studies and people would laugh at you if you had this kind of study. And but if you look at any of these shows that you're talking about, Supernatural especially, but almost any of these shows you're talking about, they have references that go back thousands of years, and they make understand these tropes and these narratives that go back thousands of years in scripture, but also in mythology and things like that. They make them relevant again for people to whom that they may not even have known about them. They know about them because some of them because of Supernatural, and then they go out and they want to learn more about it. Because the one thing about fans of this kind of sort of the fantastical is they will read the scholarship. They want to know everything about the context, and which I really respect. And so that brings some of these very, very old narratives and ideas back into the common understanding in a way that maybe they were floating away from. So, you know, that's another reason why I think fan studies is so important.
Well, and you're right about the lore. And of course, with Supernatural, one of the things was that they couldn't just make up monsters. It had to have some sort of root in real folklore and mythology. And, you know, from the Enochian language and the whole concept of Enochian. And, you know, one of the things that got me as soon as we headed into the, you know, the seals and the first apocalypse was that somebody had a working knowledge of dispensationalism to pull from in great detail. And I'm raising my hand going, okay, wait, I see what you did there. How the heck did you get there? But they did that over and over again with the depth of scholarship that went into a TV show's scripts on.
They read medieval theologians.
Yes.
They read, you know, Greek classics. They absolutely.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, damn kind of made Latin cool. And that's okay. Yeah, I joke that you know you've been following the show too much when you can correct when somebody has written the Latin exorcism incorrectly and you're spotting the typos in their Latin. You don't want to summon anything when you're sending them away. Stacey, you wrote about the apocalypse, and for the boys, what's the plural of apocalypse?
Yeah, exactly.
Apocalypti.
Yeah, exactly.
But certainly an end of all things is just an undercurrent in the show. Fix one, there's another. Talk to us about what that meant for the show's storyline and structure.
Yeah, I mean, it was fascinating because I think I say in the essay or maybe in the introduction, you know, this is a show that talks about very early on. John says, you know, they're facing this, you know, they're hunting the yellow idea, and this will end tonight. This will end, and of course it doesn't. You know, and I think apocalypse becomes this thing they're constantly building. You know, the series was very clever in the way they built to it because it starts off very much monster of the week. You know, like we're facing these very seemingly random monsters and events. And one of the things I think was particularly impressive about the first 5-year kind of arc that they structured was the way in which they sowed the seeds of apocalypse very carefully to kind of build to this payoff, to build to this where we're actually, you like you said, we're suddenly we're going to go there. We are going to raise Lucifer from hell, and it's not going to be weird. Sam's going to raise Lucifer from hell, and we're going to go to this apocalypse. And it was I think it was a really coherently structured narrative. It tied into what Regina is talking about in terms of, you know, these kind of Judeo-Christian narrative that they're building on. But then I think what was great was that sense of now saying, actually, apocalypse is, we can read it in this one kind of religious kind of doctrine, but actually the way in which we think about apocalypse these days is not necessarily in those terms, but actually is to do with this idea that apocalypse is to do with the end of something. It's about change. It's about rupture, as opposed to rapture, and I think that was the thing that suddenly becomes the whole notion of what is the plural of apocalypse, oh, we're facing another apocalypse, is the fact that actually they're constantly facing change. And the writers, and I've written a lot about apocalypse in other contexts, and one of the things that I think that we as an audiences were constantly confronted with change in the last 15-20 years. We're dealing with natural disasters and economic collapse, and there's a lot of change that we've been dealing with, and the show is constantly responding to that, which is why to track apocalypses in it, the show is fascinating, because they are dealing with corporate America, and suddenly let's bring in the Leviathan, and let's really talk about kind of economic disruption and really this kind of apocalypse. But then we're going to talk about pandemic, and it was amazing writing about, and it was particularly poignant writing about this in relation to Supernatural in 2020 in lockdown. And it was suddenly like, it was not only like I've written about before, in advance of 2020, where I was just sort of saying, yes, all this stuff's out there, yes, we're preoccupied by pandemic, and suddenly writing it in 2020, it made you realize that this stuff has just been bubbling along. This didn't come out of nowhere. This is always going to happen. These things are going to happen. And these writers are picking up, are responding to the world around them and building into it to create this really challenging journey for these two characters and their ensemble, constantly having to fight this seemingly unwinnable fight. And one of the things I really like is the fact that it's a show that says, there isn't an answer, there isn't a simple solution. All you can do is keep working. So when I was writing this, all I kept thinking was, yes, this is what they're teaching me. They're teaching me you just got to keep working at it. You've just got to keep fighting. And that was so I think that's why it's so poignant, as opposed to just being bleak. It's not a bleak vision because of the hope that they give us, that you just got to carry on. You just got to carry on and keep fighting.
And Chuck sure got it right about the toilet paper, didn't he?
He absolutely.
So
Finger on the
amazingly
pulse.
Yeah.
Well, and it's something that comes up so many times, and you've alluded to it here, several folks have, is that Supernatural managed to be of a time and out of time at the same time. So there's a nostalgia, especially even as we get to the 15th year for where they were and where we were in 2005. But then there's also a timelessness, and part of it's the music and the classic car and some of the concepts. So it does comment on what's going on without, I think, becoming out of date when you come back to it 10 years from now, because those are essential concepts. They'll just keep cycling. Any thought on that idea of being in and out of time at the same time?
Yeah, this might be sort of maybe a little bit related, but when I was writing my essay, I kept finding more and more ways that the last season was touching back to the first season, and I kept adding, going into it, I didn't even think, I'd watched it from the beginning, and I didn't even think I was going to find it. I kept finding more and more ways that, whether it was a particular scene with them, standing over the hood of the car, and closing it, and things that they were wearing, that they were thoughtful enough to bring back sort of similar clothes, in that last and someone's talked about it, how the positioning of the brothers between season 5 and season 15, and there's so many nice ways. So I think that works perfectly, that like you said, it's this, things are constantly changing and the brothers have to deal with that. But there's also the sense of things are staying the same. But even in that, it allows, the fans and the viewers to see in that kind of same image or the same positioning how much they have actually changed, in 15 years time. Yeah. So I think that cycle, that idea is such an interesting one.
Mm-hmm. One of the things I think is really important in the sense of the show retaining its coherence over 15 years. I'm sorry, it's the music. And again, it's those two twin things. Firstly, the classic rock. It's classic rock. It massively predates the show. It is part of the culture. People have been listening to this music since the 60s and 70s. So it goes right the way through. So it's outside of any particular time frame. But also the actual strategy for the original music, with the same two composers, Jay Gruszka, Christopher Lennertz, scoring right the way through those 15 years in a really consistent way. And it's the initial way that they started scoring was actually very well thought out, in that a lot of the time the music isn't very obtrusive. A lot of the time it is just scoring mood, tension, environment. But then particularly with Jay Gruszka's score, you've got this tiny group. I mean, the Dean theme is the big one. There are two or three other little themes that crop up. But because they're used so infrequently, he can get away with using the same theme for 15 years. And so it gives that coherence, that continuity, without actually getting old, without getting annoying or irritating, or because it is such a simple theme, it's never going to sound dated. It's almost folk music the way he's written it. So it has a timelessness to it. So the music has helped give it the continuity, but also stop it from getting dated, because they didn't score it all with pop music written in 2005.
Yeah, terrific point.
Yeah.
Well, and we've talked a lot about agency, but I think one of the other things that runs the whole way through the show is how they subvert our expectations of identity and agency. Dean is the rough, tough guy, but how many times have we seen him cry? Sam is the nerd, and as the meme goes in our fandom, this is the nerd. He's the scholarly guy, but he can also, hold his own in a fight. The angels are dicks. The demons sometimes are friends. There's a lot of subversion there on our expectations around identity. Any thoughts on that?
One of the things that I think I was drawn to very early on was that sense is that part of the narrative of the series is the characters start off with a clear-cut sense of good and evil, like us good, hunters, demons, monsters bad. And I think one of the things that you like about the narrative journey is the fact that they go through a process that subverts that, as Sam becomes implicated and his lineage is connected to that, as they encounter monsters who perhaps aren't as clear-cut evil, and the vampires who are sympathetic vampires, and they start unpacking the fact that hunters may be more monstrous because they're brutal, like they're brutal killers at times. So I think there's something really coherent and really nicely done about how in a way, the premise of the series is to undercut our expectations of things in order to kind of roll out what is a very complicated, morally complicated world, which is one of the reasons why I think audience that we respond so well to it, because it's not giving us it's not giving us the easy answers. It's confronting us with characters who we love, who are doing horrible things, or confronting our or challenging our expectations.
Yeah, I think you're right on that, because I remember the first time I confronted the whole angels or dicks idea, and I, at first it kind of hit on me, and then I thought, wait a second, can I think of a single time in traditional scripture where the angels ever showed up to help human beings when they weren't ordered to do so? No. Can I think of times when they showed up to break bad on folks? Yes. Okay, maybe angels really are dicks. I hadn't thought about it that way, but what an interesting reading that subverts the expectation just on that one thing.
Absolutely.
Let's not get into God, shall we?
Yeah. No, but I was also thinking of someone like Crowley. I think Crowley was this wonderful and creation to completely undermine all our expectations up until that point about demons, and suddenly we're introduced to this one who is charismatically rich and morally complicated and wants to be a buddy and ends up in a bromance. Like it's a really beautiful creation that is, and yet he's always still Crowley. Like, he doesn't then kind of, they don't also feel the need to say he's not a demon, or he isn't still out to for more souls, out for power. So I think there's something really rich about the length of the series to allow these characters to evolve and shift and change, and for us to kind of shift with them.
Well, it allows the issue of agency again, because here, especially with the angel and demon characters, they're supposed to be set in their path by the narrative, the overarching narrative of the tradition that they come from. This is, you made this choice, this is who you are now. But the way the series works, it does such a beautiful job of allowing them to assert their will. You know, a lot of them start out, including Castiel, who everybody loves, starts out following the will, but over the 15 years, or actually whatever the 11 years that he's in the series, completely becomes his own person. Same with Krell, same with a lot of the characters. And it really is, not only are our human characters struggling for agency, but these characters are struggling for agency within the traditions that they're supposed to come from. And that's what really makes it interesting.
And one of the things that comes out so early is Sam's conviction that it's not what you are, it's what you do. And Dean having to come, he's not going to kill Sammy. So he has to shift his thinking to find a place for Sam, even with the demon blood in his thinking, being a good person. And that's a huge learning process as the series goes on.
Can I just mention Meg?
Yes.
Because I think Meg actually, in terms of that trajectory of, she starts out as so black and white bad girl. And by the end, she goes through such a complex journey. And yeah, she's a relatively minor character, but she's there all the way through as a character, even if not played by the same actress. So I think, again, that sense of how things are simply not black and white, especially with the demons.
Yeah. And then, talking about how everything that goes around comes around. Certainly the mercy that was shown Sam worked out for the best. But in the last episode, the vampire they let get away is the one whose nest kills Dean. So sometimes you win, sometimes you lose.
Mm-hmm.
Well, folks, we have blown through our time, and this has been fantastic. And I know we could probably spend the rest of the afternoon talking about this. But I really want to urge everybody to read Monstrum. But let's go around again, please, and let everybody know where they can find you and your work online. Kristopher?
Well, quite a bit of it's on Monstrum. There are also, so Monstrum is, I guess I can share the web address. Monstrum -society.ca is the address, and that's where you can find the courses, the journal, and some resources as well. We've been starting to work with video essays and things like that. So there's all kinds of cool stuff there. And and I have 2 books out this year. So that one of them on Toby Hooper and one of them on Shirley Jackson. So take a look at those too.
Awesome. Melissa?
So I'm on Twitter. Also have a website, melissaedmundson.com, and that lists some of my publications. But right now I'm continuing my work to sort of recover women writers of the Gothic and Supernatural. So and over the last few years, I've done some editions with Handheld Press. So a quick search for that would bring those up for you. So I'm gonna have some women's weird anthologies and some single author ones as well.
Awesome. Regina?
Yeah, so I've got 2 books. I have a novel actually that just came out, a YA novel called The Coming Storm, and a book with Jeffrey Weinstock collecting called about Satan in cinema. So it's called Giving the Devil His Due, Satan in Cinema, from someplace, Fordham. And I just had a thing in the conversation about Catholicism in horror. So that's what's out right now.
Interesting. Steve?
I've got various essays, mostly on Buffy, in the online journal Slayage. I have this delightful little book which came out a few years ago, edited by Stacey. But this has got, in particular, a chapter on Monster movie, from Supernatural. And I got some stuff coming out on Dollhouse later in this year. So,
Stacey.
Well, I'm on Twitter at Stacey Abbott RU, and a search for me at the University of Northampton, you'll get a list of my publications. Most recently, I've written a book on the Catherine Bigelow's Near Dark, so I'm available online. I've done various podcasts about that recently, so if anyone does any search for Stacey and Near Dark, you'll find that. And if you haven't seen Near Dark, I recommend everyone goes out and sees it because it's great. And I've also done a book on global TV horror as well, so any searches for that. And I'm currently working on animation and horror, so it'll all come back to Scooby Natural again at some point or other, because that's going to be a key text. So that's what I'm doing these days.
Awesome.
Could I add one thing that I forgot?
Yes, please.
I'm
Yes,
really sorry.
absolutely.
So I have a project that I think the people watching, listening would be interested in called BTV, which is a book series coming soon from Bloomsbury. And the BTV focus, it's television under the critical radar. And we're talking about, one of the books is going to be talking about 80s horror semi-anthology television. So Friday the 13th, the series, Tales from the Dark Side. And these series really are influential on Supernatural. So that Supernatural gets into that dialogue as well. So if you want to check out just the initial, we have a long blog that we did over 6 months on Friday the 13th, the series, on my website, The Hauntologist. So if people want to check that out, you can read about the BTV series, and the book should start coming out in 2023, I think. So keep your eyes out for BTV.
Well, that all sounds wonderful. Thank you all so much for sharing your time with us and for the wonderful discussion. So thank you so much for being with us, and thanks to all of you for watching and listening. There'll be more Supernatural coming up on Continual, so we'll see you online.